Today we see around us in the country at large protests and demonstrations. These are met with disproportionate force. At the same time, quietly, in an entirely disciplined manner, our citizens cannot go to the polling booth and mark their ballot papers because there are no elections. So they cannot express their opposition to the government by the exercise of freedoms which are guaranteed to them by the Constitution of Sri Lanka. And what is more, they cannot even exercise their fundamental democratic right of voting at regular elections. There never was a time in the history of our country when our people had to get on the streets, face baton charges, tear gas, water cannon, and be admitted to hospitals with profuse bleeding from serious injuries. That was never the lot, the fate of our people. That is because, as an integral part of our legal and cultural heritage, our people were always guaranteed the right to vote freely at elections that are regularly held. They did not have to ask for that right. They did not have to agitate for that right. That right was placed at their disposal by no less than the paramount law of this land, the Constitution of Sri Lanka. Today the situation is entirely different. There is one omnipotent personality that has arrogated to himself the power of deciding when elections are going to be held, if elections are going to be held at all, and if they are going to be held, when would they be held? When will the economic circumstances make it possible for these elections to be held? Entirely a matter at his unqualified discretion. It can be next year, it can be the year after that. There is no certainty or clarity with regard to that at all. Elections are a litmus test of democracy. In a country where elections are suppressed, the basic democratic framework simply does not exist. Now the question before the people is whether they are going to supinely, passively submit to that situation, or whether with courage and determination they are going to resist this despicable attempt to deprive our people of the basic tenets of the democratic tradition to which they are proud heirs. So that is the main objective of the protests and demonstrations that we are seeing all around us by various constituent groups of the opposition in this country. But there is also the unprecedented suffering that people are undergoing today because of acute economic deprivation. The inhuman tax policy, which leaves people with no disposable incomes to meet the basic needs of their families. There is total insensitivity, callousness on the part of the government. But that is not all. It is not the pain, the anguish that our people are being subjected to in a manner that has no parallel at any other time in the history of our country. That is not all. That is greatly exacerbated by another factor which is largely responsible for the resentment the acute displeasure that is all too manifest across the social spectrum in this country. And that is unbridled corruption. Unbridled corruption. On the one hand, acute suffering on the part of the people of this country. On the other hand, avarice, greed, insatiable, the desire to make more and more money, notwithstanding the dire straits to which our country has been reduced. Just a few days ago, there was the report of the Auditor General pointing out a colossal scam which has resulted in the people of our country being deprived of more than 4 billion rupees, which rightfully belongs to them. So this money is plundered. The coffers are rendered empty. The coffers have to be filled again. For that purpose, oppressive taxation has to be imposed on our people. Just reflect on a moment on the unbelievable things that are happening. There are parliamentary committees with the express function of controlling corruption. In keeping with the standing orders of the Sri Lankan Parliament, the chairmanship of some of these committees compulsorily belongs to the opposition. The government is now trying to decide who in the opposition they should nominate to fill these chairman positions in these committees, parliamentary select committees. That is, opposition personalities are now sought to be identified not by the opposition but by the government. Would anybody in their senses believe that an oversight function worthy of its name can possibly be fulfilled by committees with a leadership that is formed in this way? This is eyewash. It is a smoke screen. These committees serve no purpose whatsoever. They are an adjunct to the government in power. They are not watchdogs as they are meant to be. There is no surveillance function which they can conceivably perform. It is simply a fraud to mislead the international community. That is what has given rise to this pathetic state of affairs, where two President's Council, who are members of the Cabinet, the Honorable Ali Sabri, President's Counsel, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Honorable Dr. Vijaydas Rajapaksa, Minister for Justice, Constitutional Affairs and Prison Reforms, they are members of a Cabinet subcommittee which has been appointed for the sole and express purpose of containing fraud. They are now saying, we don't want to remain members of that committee because not even the Cabinet subcommittee is being provided with accurate and complete information. What we are provided with is distorted, false information. We do not want to be party to this fraud, and we are therefore making a conscious and deliberate decision to distance ourselves from this despicable fraud. I say that this is what is infuriating the people of our country. The total disregard of suffering. Don't care. Doesn't matter. All that we want to do is, during the short period of the current parliament, everybody knows that it can't go on for very long. Let us make hay while the sun shines. Let us stuff our pockets. Let us make as much money as possible, no matter what the consequences are for the citizenry of this land. It is that is provoking this feeling of indignation, resistance, acute displeasure with what is being done. It's not just the pain and the suffering that accompanies the tax policy and the harsh, oppressive economic policies of the government that is aggravated by all the frauds that are taking place under the very noses of our people. That is the motivation underpinning the protests that are all too evident in all parts of the country. What is the government's response to that? Oppression, more oppression, and still more oppression. A very short-sighted policy. In a country, Sri Lanka, which has a vibrant democratic tradition, the country that is perennially conscious of its received political and cultural heritage, of which it is inordinately proud. A very short-sighted policy, cannot last for long, and the dismal failure of this policy will be apparent to all in a very short period of time. So the government is saying we are not holding elections. Can't do it, can't afford it. It's an absolute falsehood. The problem is not the lack of resources, but the lack of political will. And the political will is not there because the government knows full well that an election at this point will result in the government being vanquished, a really humiliating defeat for the people, for the government at the hands of the people. Because the government is well aware, on the basis of professional services which have been done, that both constituent parties of the government together do not enjoy more than 10% of support among the people of our country. The Elections Commission made a pledge, a solemn undertaking to the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka on the 10th of February that they are resolutely committed to holding this election as required by law on the 9th of March. But they were compelled to go back to the Supreme Court with a motion explaining that much as they wish to hold this election, they are unfortunately not able to do so because they are not provided with even the minimum resources that are required for the conduct of an election. Who is responsible for this? The principal offender is the Secretary to the Treasury, the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Mahinda Siriwardena. His refusal to make this money available for the purpose of conducting this election has given rise to consequences of the gravest magnitude for the people of Sri Lanka. Just consider for the moment the consequences directly emanating from his action. Within the country, what are the consequences? On the 19th of March, all local government bodies stand dissolved by compulsory operation of law. Municipal councils, town councils, Pradesh Sabhas, 340 such local government institutions become defunct. They cannot function any longer. They're dead. What happens next? All those functions are transferred to government officials. Government officials. Now the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, in a famous case, declared that the functions of local authorities are of direct importance and relevance to the everyday lives of the people of Sri Lanka. In the picturesque language of the Supreme Court, these functions have a vital bearing on the well-being of our people from the cradle to the grave. That is a phrase used by the Supreme Court. So these are organs, bodies, which are vitally important in a practical context. But after the 19th of March, thanks to Mr. Mahinda Siriwardena, there will not be one single elected member in any of these 340 local bodies up and down Sri Lanka. Not one. They'll all be sent compulsorily home. This is the same dismal fate that befell the provincial councils, where elections have not been held for more than 4 years. So in the provincial councils, as we speak, again, not one single elected member. The governor and the officials acting under the supervision of the governor are responsible for the entire gamut of activities that fall within the purview of the provincial councils of Sri Lanka, and that is the position. So come 19th of March, neither at the provincial council level nor at the local government level is there any semblance of democracy functioning in this country. No democracy, wiped out. It has evaporated into thin air. No elections, no elected representatives. That is the essence of democracy, the litmus test of democracy. If there are no elections, if the people are not given the opportunity to express their will and pleasure at freely conducted elections at regular intervals, not only is there a dilution of democracy, but a complete removal of the essential features, the fundamental, the irreducible features of a functioning democratic state. That is the position which has been brought about by the refusal of the Secretary to the Treasury to release these funds for the purpose of conducting elections that are required by the Constitution of this country. So, those are the consequences within the island, internal consequences. Let us now focus for a moment on the external consequences, which are no less devastating, in fact even more horrendous. Today, the 52nd session of the Human Rights Council commences in Geneva, and Sri Lanka is one of the countries that will receive a very sharp focus. It is certainly not going to help our cause when the whole world knows that there is a contemptuous rejection of elections, a cavalier, light-hearted attitude, humor, jokes regarding the suspension of the entire democratic process. Some people might find it amusing, but certainly not the international community. Certainly not the representatives of nations gathered in Geneva at the 52nd meeting of the Human Rights Council. On a very pragmatic plane, bread and butter issues. We are all aware of the pathetic condition of our economy at this time. The silver lining, if ever there was one, consists of our export income. The foreign exchange that we earn from the export of products manufactured in Sri Lanka. Our principal markets are located in Western Europe, where we enjoy very substantial competitive advantages. Our exports are entitled to duty-free entry into the markets of Western Europe. Duty-free, it is not a reduction of duty, it is a total exemption from duty. Now, this huge advantage is neither a gift nor an entitlement. It is not something which we can rest on our laurels and enjoy in perpetuity. Not indefinitely, not for a long time. It is a conditional benefit. Conditional on what? Conditional on meticulous adherence to the obligations that Sri Lanka has voluntarily undertaken by signing no fewer than 27 international treaties, the chief among which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The pillar of the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, is free elections at regular intervals, at intervals mandated by law. If we contemptuously reject elections, if it is a joke for us, then there is a cost to be paid. And it is a pretty exorbitant cost. It has been made very clear to us that the continuation of GSP plus benefits is very much in jeopardy. We cannot take that for granted. And the refusal to hold elections, directly stemming from the refusal of the Treasury Secretary to make available to the Elections Commission the funds that are required for the conduct of the election, this is going to be a principal element in the negative environment which could well culminate in the withdrawal of GSP plus benefits from Sri Lanka with horrendous consequences, not for the Treasury, but for the people of our country. Today, there are no fewer than 300,000 people, mainly girls, working in garment factories situated through the length and breadth of this country. 300,000, that is direct employment. Indirect employment, close to 1 million. These are mainly girls who work in these garment factories, who support their families. It is no less than a social revolution, uplifting the quality of life of these people, not just in Colombo and its environs, but also in the rural areas of Sri Lanka. It is that is put recklessly, irresponsibly in jeopardy as a direct consequence of the refusal of the Treasury to make resources available for the conduct of elections. We have no ill will or spite against anyone. We don't even know some of these personalities at all. But we do have a duty by the country. The Secretary to the Treasury has blatantly contravened imperative provisions of the Constitution of Sri Lanka. We today have the absurd situation of the Elections Commission being reduced to a state where the Commission has to address a communication to the Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Mahindayapa Abeyewardena, requesting the intervention of the Speaker to make available to the Elections Commission the resources that are required for holding the election. Nothing could be more absurd than that. It is humiliating for the Elections Commission. It is totally unnecessary. There is no need for a letter. The Parliament of Sri Lanka, which is the custodian of public finance, and the authority is solely responsible for the conduct of public finance. In terms of Article 148 of the Constitution, the Parliament of Sri Lanka has allocated 10 billion rupees in the last Annual Appropriation Act, the budget that was passed in December last year. 10 billion rupees allotted to the Elections Commission for the sole and express purpose of conducting this election. That money is there for that purpose. Not to appoint state ministers and to hold tamashas, to use it for that purpose. That is the inalienable duty of the Secretary to the Treasury. It is his responsibility. He is a trustee for funds belonging to the public, not to his political masters. Now, the violation of that sacred duty carries condign consequences. The Secretary to the Treasury certainly is not entitled to take refuge behind a circular of the Finance Ministry relating to purposes for which money can and cannot be spent without the express approval of the Minister. I think the Treasury Secretary is aware that, he should be aware certainly, that a Treasury circular cannot supersede or override the highest law of this country, the Constitution of Sri Lanka. There is no contest between these two at all. He is bound by the Constitution. He cannot violate the Constitution on the basis of a circular which is inconsistent with the Constitution. If there is a conflict, it is the Constitution that has to prevail. A first-year law student will be aware of that. So that is an excuse that is not worthy of consideration for one moment. All we have to tell the people of our country is that we are resolutely committed to defending and upholding their rights, particularly a right that is as sacrosanct as a right to vote, the franchise. And we will pursue with all the energy at our command every remedy that is available under the Constitution of Sri Lanka against the Secretary of the Treasury to bring him before the courts of this country. Under this government and under a future government, he has to answer for the consequences of his deliberate action, which has inflicted incalculable damage on the well-being of our people, both within the country and at the international level.